Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. This is the third rest day of the Tour de France 2022. We got 6 more stages left at the Tour de France and 3 mountain stages that are still left to come. Stage 16, Stage 17, and Stage 18, so 3 big mountain stages in a row. One thing you want to notice when you're talking about those 3 mountain stages, the last 2 mountain stages, those are short stages, so they're going to be intense. And of course, the last mountain stage, the last big mountain to pass here at the 2022 Tour de France is Haut-de-Camp. Haut-de-Camp's a massive climb at over 8% pitches. And I remember doing it in 2014, and it was a showdown there on Haut-de-Camp. And of course, we all remember the days of Miguel Indurain, Benesto going up Haut-de-Camp, suffering off the back with Bjarne Riis going up the road, just putting time into Miguel Indurain on Haut-de-Camp. So it's a mythical climb, and it's the last big climb for Tadej Pogacar to put the hurt on Jonas Vingegaard from Jumbo-Visma if he hasn't dropped him already. Now, Jonas Vingegaard, Jumbo-Visma. There's all kinds of dilemma here with Jumbo-Visma because yesterday's last stage here of the Tour de France so far, we saw 2 riders leave the Tour de France. Primoz Roglic left, which I don't really agree with here when you're letting a rider like Primoz Roglic leave to get ready for another Grand Tour of Spain. When I think about this, I understand he's hurt. And when we compare it to last year, I agreed with it last year because when he had left the Tour de France, at that point in time, no one had seen the potential that Jonas Vingegaard would be sitting second on the general classification at the Tour de France. But this year, with Primoz Roglic is departing the Tour de France, Jonas Vingegaard is sitting first here at the Tour de France. I think when you're at the Tour de France, it's the biggest, best race in the world, hands down. And there's no other objective to focus on when you have so much on the line and you're riding for Jumbo-Visma. But Jumbo-Visma give a bunch of their riders free cards. You got to remember, Primoz Roglic, he's getting a free card when he's leaving. They must have had a discussion, and certainly he could have ridden through yesterday's stage, has a day off today, could have maybe recovered, and might feel good on tomorrow's Stage 16 when we're back in the mountains. Probably not, but in my mind, when you're talking about the Tour de France, you're Primoz Roglic, I think you got to push through it and go as far as you possibly can and forget about the Tour of Spain. And remember, guys, I won the Tour of Spain in 2013, and I still believe Primoz Roglic should stay here at the Tour de France when your team is wearing the race leader's yellow jersey. Now, you saw me discussing the tactics with Jumbo-Visma on yesterday's NBC Peacock coverage with Bob Roll, and I still believe Wout van Aert is disrespecting the race leader's yellow jersey too. When you think about it, Primoz Roglic is gone at this time, and then you look and they lose another rider with Steven Kruijswijk crashing yesterday at about 75 kilometers to go. And then Wout van Aert's doing his sprint at the finish of the stage. Keep in mind at that point in time when we're talking about the last 48 kilometers down the descent and into yesterday's stage, Jonas Vingegaard had one teammate with him that was helping him, and that was Christophe Laporte. Now, I'd seen some comments earlier on the Alpe d'Huez stage when I talked about how I didn't believe that Jumbo-Visma should have been pulling that hard on Alpe d'Huez and hurting all the riders. This is what I'm talking about when I see the comments, and it was Joanna Glasby that asked me, why did you not want him going hard? Because Jonas Vingegaard had talked about how he wanted a hard pace throughout the day, and that would help him going up the climb. But the problem is, Joanna, is that when you're looking at the races here and you're the race leader in the yellow jersey here at the Tour de France, it's not only the race leader form that is concerning. You always have to think about all your teammates. You have to think about how can I get all my teammates to get me as furthest as they possibly can on each one of these important stages. Now, back in my day in 2004, I rode for Webcor. Webcor was the smallest professional cycling team in the world. We only had 2 riders getting paid and multiple riders that were full-time students and had full-time jobs. So when I was joining the team that year in 2004, I'd won a ton of races in the U.S. domestic racing scene, and I had to figure out ways. How can I motivate these guys? How can I get them to the finish of the race? And how can I get them the furthest possible distance in the race so that I could do the last kilometers and close it if I'm all by myself? I had to figure out all kinds of tricks, and I did that. You just look at the riders around you and you go, okay, Christophe Laporte can get this far. Nathan Van Hooydonk can get this far. Wout van Aert, who knows what he can do? He's a monster. You guys know I love him. But as Tim Liscombe said in his comments on the butterfly effect, that we can no longer deny that there might be some Van Aertism attached to Wout Van Aert. And Tim, I got to agree with you. It's been hidden. I should have noticed it a long time ago. But with Wout Van Aert being so strong, it's hard to notice because he wins so many races. Here at the Tour de France, though, it's clear to see that there's some Wout Van Aertism going on, and he's clearly racing for himself. I don't ever respect when a rider starts racing 100% for themselves, because the main goal when you sign up on a team always has to be what's best for the team. And let me remind you guys, we're just finished stage 16. We're on the third rest day here at the Tour de France, and Jonas Vingegaard is wearing the race leader's jersey at the biggest, best bike race in the world. Historic riders win here at the Tour de France and go on to complete amazing things in their career and become legends in the sport when you win at the Tour de France. So while Van Aert going up there on yesterday's stage, while in the race leader's green jersey, already pretty much solid, going to win that competition and going for point sprints with about 55 kilometers to go with his teammate chasing through the field, dropping all of his teammates back there, and Wout's up there, and then we're going into the finish with only one teammate, Christophe Laporte, looking after Jonas Vingegaard in case he has some problems and keeping him out of the wind. And there we see Wout Van Aert sitting at the back trying to win the stage on yesterday's stage 16. I don't like it. Never have, and that's the reason I think Primoz should have be still in the race. Wout Van Aert should be racing the race leader's yellow jersey. And if we go all the way back to stage 5, and if Wout Van Aert had been racing on the front, looking after his teammates, I believe Primoz Roglic wouldn't have crashed, and we'd have 2 Jumbo-Visma's riders in this race still at the Tour de France. But that's hypothetical, I know. Now, one other thing I want to cover. When we're going forward here at the Tour de France, Tadej Pogacar has a mammoth problem here in the form of Jonas Vingegaard. I still love Tadej Pogacar. I love his aggression. He's the best bike racer in the world, and he's got a few more mountain stages here left at the Tour de France to try to win 3 Tour de France's back-to-back. Now, when we look at these next coming mountain stages, I want to point some things out. Each one of the mountain stages, the very beginning, has about 50, 65 kilometers of kind of flat roads, and that's going to be really hard now for Jumbo-Visma to control the race. There's an upside to the flat section, and there's a downside. If this racing's full gas and a big break splits, but they split late in the race before the big climb start, then Jumbo-Visma get a free ride from the beginning of the race all the way up to that big climb starts. But let's say a big break goes, like on yesterday's, like 2 days ago on stage 14, when that big break went with Louis Meintjes in there, it took a lot of work from Jumbo-Visma at the end of that race to hold Louis Meintjes out of the race leader's yellow jersey. Now he's back in the top 10. When we look at the top 8 riders on the general classification, all of them are about 4.5 minutes. Remember last year's Tour de France, Tadej Pogacar already had a 5-minute lead on everybody on the general classification. So this year, with 8 riders up there and then 2-3 other riders that we're talking about 10, 11, and 12 minutes back on the general classification, if they can get in one of those early attacks on this next stage, 16, 17, and 18, that can put Jumbo-Visma under a lot of pressure. And, well, Van Aert's still racing for stage wins yesterday, so he might be tired one of these days at the Tour de France. Probably not, I know, but can he get over the big mountains and still help Jonas Vingegaard if he gets in trouble with attacks coming? If one of those big riders from in the top 10, top 12, top 13, maybe here at the Tour de France, all the way down to just ahead of Nielsen Palace, if any of those riders can get in this early break, and they should all be trying, because that's the way you're going to move up on the general classification, Jumbo-Visma are going to be put in the hurt locker with only 6 riders here able to ride. Jonas Vingegaard crashed yesterday. Thies Benoot crashed yesterday. So there's a big question marks on how they can perform on tomorrow's stage 16 here of the Tour de France. But one thing's for certain, there's going to be big attacks when all the smaller teams look and see that Tadej Pogacar doesn't have a full team around him with UAE Team Emirates and hasn't been able to drop Jonas Vingegaard. So he doesn't have the team to put him on the front. And of course, Jumbo-Visma is a compromised team at this point in time because nobody knows exactly how well this team can perform. With only 6 riders in the race, 2 hurt, and one of those riders is wearing the race leader's yellow jersey. Anything can happen, which means there's blood in the water and all the teams are going to be aggressive. If I'm Tadej Pogacar and I'm going into these last 3 mountain stages, I like the idea of letting somebody that's a threat on the general classification get in one of these big moves, sitting back, making Jumbo-Visma do everything, and hopefully Jonas Vingegaard has to go on the attack on one of these climbs to control whoever's up in that front break so that he can still stay in the race leader's yellow jersey at the end of the stage. if Jonas Vingegaard has to do some pulling on one of these big mammoth mountains that are going to come up here and summit when we're talking about the next stage 17 and 18, if he's got to pull from the bottom to the top, you know Tadej Pogacar will be aggressive and attacking Jonas Vingegaard all the way to the line. And this is exactly what Tadej Pogacar needs. He needs Jonas Vingegaard's Jumbo-Visma team to blow up, chasing somebody that's 4 minutes to 10 minutes back on the general classification that gained a bunch of time. He's lost all his teammates because they've done a ton of work throughout the early part of this Tour de France. And then Tadej Pogacar might have the window of opportunity, if he doesn't have the form, to just drop Jonas flat out here at the Tour de France. Now remember, doesn't have to win on Haut-de-Camp, but he's got to gain a lot of time on Jonas Vingegaard on that by that last mountain climb here at the Tour de France Haut-de-Camp if he wants any chance of going into the long 40-kilometer individual time trial on the penultimate day here of the Tour de France. When we start looking at that individual time trial, I got to believe anything over 30 seconds to Jonas Vingegaard is going to be a bit too much for Tadej Pogacar to pull back. So these next 3 stages here at the Tour de France are going to be vital for the Slovenian if he wants 3 Tour de France victories. And the next 3 stages for Jumbo-Visma are going to be crucial on the team holding together and Wout van Aert not doing any Wout van Aertism. Because, Tim, I agree with you 100%. At this point in time, you got to throw Wout van Aert with the ism in there because knuckleheadism has been following Wout van Aert through this whole Tour de France. If his main objective is to look after Jonas Vingegaard to win the Tour de France. We all know that's not it, and so that's where the knuckleheadism comes from here on the Beyond the Coverage. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next edition, the Butterfly Effect, Stage 17 of the Tour de France, when we're back into the big mountains and Tadej Pogacar is going to be lighting stuff up. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you real soon.